So they're talking today about the things that help us to move forward is very much action. Action kind of harnesses our energy to go forwards. If we've stuck with a fear of something, something that's really frightening on the outside, be it our finances or perhaps a relationship or something that's just stopping us going forwards in a way that we can view ourselves being happy, we're really stuck at the red lights. It's really talking about finding some action in order to, because the fear has made us stagnate, our energy stagnate, and almost become consumed by that fear. And so it's only when we do something we begin to flood our spirit and our bodies again with some energy. The fears that we have, sometimes they're ludicrous fears and sometimes they're based in fact and reality and history and past and trauma. And those fears kind of shut us down, and they're talking very much about, they're showing me someone doing some gardening, for example, as an example of just some way forward. Any action will begin to move energy through the body. And then once you've got, you see, they want to express that it's the fear that will freeze us, will make us freeze and make us stop and make us, almost we become a victim of that fear because we just stop. We stop our energies from moving, from growing, from going forwards. So they really want to talk about just some kind of action. It could be something to go make something in the kitchen or create something, or just some kind of action to stop once we stagnate our energies, we allow the fear not only to stop us, but then we also allow the fear to become the master, really. It calls the shots, and we're stuck under the sort of umbrella of that fear. We're stuck there. And they very much want to talk about how action is that push of energy. That action is, as soon as we get into these fears, we can then become really depressed because there is no movement, there is no energy pushing through those fears. Unless something is absolutely terrifying us in that moment, those fears are being created from the outside and from the inside, and we're holding on to those fears. It's like we are feeding the monster by stopping and being inactive. We are feeding that monster. So that's what they want to talk about today, is action and the power of action and the power of just doing something. And when we become overwhelmed by our fears, almost one of the first thing that stops is it's like the fight or flight thing, and we freeze. We freeze in our fear, and that's where the energy gets lost. The fear wins over us. Yeah, so that's what they want to talk about today, is the energy of, they usually lay me a spread of cards. There's things they really want to talk about, to bring through from the subconscious world to the conscious world more. And there's certain things that they just want to say. They have so much they want to say. In addition to that, they're saying that when we don't do anything and we stagnate and we stop in that fear, we're immobilized in that fear of something that's really on our minds, that we're just really frightened is going to happen again, or like a pattern that's going to happen again, or something that is really frightening us, whether it's a material thing or or something, or in a future event or a past event or whatever that is, it's like they're showing me a no entry sign. So the fear literally means that the road that we need to go down, or that our awareness needs to go down in order to really flourish and find more joy, that has literally got a no entry sign on it. And the way forward, the way to push that, to get past that no entry sign, push it out the way, is really by taking some kind of action. It can be completely unrelated to the fear or anything, just some kind of action to stop the immobilization of the fear, to start regenerating some energy in the spirit and the body again, rather than to stop and be immobile and then get consumed by it and then get into a depression. So very much some kind of positive action, even just going for a walk, or something that involves some kind of gentle action that's constructive of some sort. So what they also want to add about this is that it's likely that when you hear, say, the Spirit saying something like action, you've got to take action, it's like, oh God, that's the last thing I want to do. Absolutely, that is the last thing you want to do. Because this is the trick. The fear that we're stuck into, the inaction that we're stuck into, the thing that freezes us. And it kind of, the fear whispers to us all the time that stay safe, stay safe, stay safe, don't change anything. And so actually what starts to happen when it kind of, the fear starts to solidify in us. And that feels like a safe position to stop, to freeze, to stay safe. Because the most terrifying thing is to change anything. So that feeling of, oh, someone else is going to tell us we've got to do something, that's just the last thing I feel like is doing something. Of course it is. Because that is how the fear is winning that battle all the time. That fear is winning that battle. As long as because it's kind of like the boss, it remains the boss, it remains the top dog, it remains on top. If it can keep that person in a state of inactivity, in a state of being overwhelmed. So it's usually the last thing. And if that's true for you, they're saying, then that's exactly your solution. Is if you're feeling like, oh God, I'm not going for a run, and I'm not going to a bloody gym, and I'm not going to a, it's not saying go to a gym. It's just saying the lie that's going on in the fear is that, by doing nothing, you're keeping it safe, you're keeping it controlled, you're keeping it. They say very much that, it's not that inactivity, it's not the lack of chaos really that keeps it all under wraps and keep it under control. It's the not looking at the fear, not opening up the chaos, actually, that allows that fear dominance. Not opening it up, investigating it, looking at all the layers and throwing out the rubbish from the fears and working out that's a bit of rubbish, that's just overblown, okay, that happened, I'm not going to let that happen again, etc., etc. So once you start to moving the energy in place of that fear, once you start doing something, but it doesn't mean when they're talking about action, they don't mean, you've got to do something really impressive, you've got to go and climb a mountain or go up Mount Everest, or it's not another of those. It's not another of those. Oh, for God's sake, like we all feel like, oh yeah, we've got to go and do that in order to be worthy, or do that in order to be good enough. It's not saying that. They're not saying that at all. They're just talking about as a concept that of a practical thing, that fear does this. Therefore, the way to move and start moving through the fear, which we all want to do, and to get out of it, is not to keep it safe and unchanging, but to unbutton it, get some movement, then you'll find that you can then start to look at this fear that's overblown, that's started to take control. It's almost like, as I said, we're feeding the monster. So by doing nothing, we are feeding it and allowing it to grow and get bigger. And that fear can stay with us for weeks, for years, for a lifetime. It can stay with us. Those fears can stay with us, for a lifetime, if we don't find that energy to move through them, and then look at them and investigate the fears. Where do they come from? Why have I got that fear? How did this fear come into being? What does it look like if I don't have that? If I didn't have that fear, what does my life look like? Can I imagine my life without that fear going on? Can I imagine? And if not, and if I can't, why can't I imagine? And these are the questions that help us to get to the answers as to why we've created these monstrous fears, and perhaps are living in the land of these fears and accepting these fears in our lives instead of just getting rid of them. Whether it's someone that's causing us constant fear in our life, or trauma or drama in our life, we can start to look at that. But it's very much talking about action and fear, and how really action is the enemy of fear. And it doesn't mean go and do something spectacular, So they're really expressing that any kind of movement of energy is the positive thing. Even if you were just to write yourself a letter, or write a letter. They're particularly talking about writing a letter or writing something down. So they're talking in particular about, you might be someone who keeps a diary or writes things down sometimes. And sometimes it can be so helpful to sort of make something a little bit objective. And see, we're so caught up in our own world, we're so immersed in our own world. By writing something, we're kind of separating out from us a little bit, and we're looking outwards in. And obviously, and I know myself that sometimes when I've written something down and I look outwards in at it, I think, oh my God, you were putting up with that. But sometimes you can't see until you've almost objectified it, or made it more objective to you rather than subjective. You made it more slightly outside of yourself, and you can almost see it as an objective viewer would see it, and then you can see things from a slightly less bogged down perspective. You can see things from a slightly more clearer point of view. It's a funny thing how we tolerate rubbish for ourselves, but when we see someone else being treated really badly, we say we're horrified. I always find that quite shockingly. It's quite shocking, really, that we don't have that almost moral. Sometimes we don't have that kind of morality for our own selves. But again, it's easy. It's like, oh, this is the burden of me. I have to put up with me. I had me all my life. It's always been that way for me. Blah blah blah. Those are all the stories that we tell ourselves. But yet we're kind of horrified if we were to see sometimes the same awful things happen to someone else. We'd be horrified. So they're talking very much. The spirits are talking much about writing something down. So that's an action. As I say, they're saying it doesn't need to be climbing Mount Everest or going to a gym every Tuesday or starting to play badminton or whatever. It's like writing something down. It's an action. It's positive action. Just writing something down, even if you're writing down what the fear is. Hone in on it, what is it? What is the absolute, not a good enough answer, not a good enough answer. Keep saying that to yourself. What is the really root of that fear? What is the worst case scenario? What is the worst thing within that fear that can happen? There you're finding it. The deepest part of that fear. And they say that only when we're looking at that and how that deep part of the fear is affecting us, the real deepest part of it, the seed or the nut, I think it's often that we would look at the periphery of the fear and all the things the fear causes, so that we misdirect our behaviour and we delude ourselves about this and this, because we're not wanting to look deep into the fear, into the hell, really. And they're saying, look into the hell, but the way forward is through some small action. Small actions first can lead to large actions and to the exchange of energy that will then start to move, and yes, it will result in change, and change can be horrifying and terrifying. Change is a kind of chaos, and that is why, so many people end up remaining in abusive relationships, because the fears have built and they're thinking that that's outside of it will be more frightening, so we build ourselves into really being very terrified of change. But change is the only way. Change in opening up our kind of wardrobe of fears and looking at them. Change is the only way through that. But it will be a good thing, and it will be a positive thing. As they say, if we're able to look at those fears, put some action in, look at those fears and release the fears, and then you'll go forward with much more joy, and you'll be unencumbered by that fear. Imagine what it would be like to be released from that fear, to not live with it, to not every now and again be smothered by it. It's like being suffocated by it all the time. So for many of us, we go along for a certain amount of time and then we get suffocated by those same patterns of fears again, or we meet the same people, same type of people that cause those same fears to go in this sort of flight pattern that keeps going round and round and round. We wonder why we end up in these same flight patterns. But unless we look at those fears that are stopping us, we cannot change anything on the outside. It will keep on and on and on, repeating until we change those inner fears. The outside world will keep on repeating the same things, because that's the energy that we are creating. It's the law of attraction in action. If we are consumed and living in this circle of fear on something all the time, the world will reflect that to us all the time. Those same, in different ways, in creative ways, but it'll all come back to those same fears. Unless we move ourselves out of that kind of circle in the universe, unless we start moving and changing that pattern will continue. And we don't want these patterns to continue for ourselves if they don't serve us, and if they're negative patterns, we don't want them to continue. So again, coming back to the action thing, don't climb Mount Everest, or do climb Mount Everest if that's what you want to do, or just a small action, some small constructive action. And don't believe the fear that says it's not worth doing that. It's just going to make me feel more tired. I just can't face doing that. I just can't be bothered with that. Sod that. Sod the people who tell me to do this positive thing and that positive thing, and if I'll look like that or feel like that. because that's like the voice of fear speaking. That's the voice saying, don't change, don't change, don't change, don't change anything, don't move, don't move, don't move, don't move. And that's the voice of fear. Don't move, don't move, don't move. You can't move, you don't move, can't move, you don't move. You're depressed. No wonder you're depressed, because you're not allowing yourself to move in any way. And we all go there. We all go into those states of terror, you know. But just as we have the capacity to stay in those states of terror, we have the capacity to just move through them. No matter what that fear is, we have the capacity to change our lives completely and move through that fear. You know, we are allowing ourselves to be handcuffed by those fears. Doesn't matter what they are. We are allowing ourselves to be handcuffed by them, first of all. We are allowing ourselves to play the victim to the fear. We are giving the fear the power over us. We're saying this thing that we're frightened of is way bigger, way more important than we are. We're saying it's a monster that we can't defeat. And we are capable of unbelievable achievements and feats. So that the fear is lying to us. The fear lies to us. The fear keeps us in that holding pattern, because we think the change will be worse and will be more terrifying. But actually, to do nothing is the suffering. That is where the suffering lies, in the not implementing any kind of action whatsoever. So just deciding perhaps on one thing that's not right, that you're going to stop, that's not going to happen, or just, as I say, is some kind of action to move forward, can change everything. It has the power to change everything. You have the power to change everything in your life. Absolutely everything in your life.